Welcome to Lesson 7. You are now ready to use your query knowledge to do the first two reports in your assignment. The first report is sales by product greater than $2,500, and the second is sales by salesperson greater than $2,000 in Chicago and $3,000 in Kansas City. I made it a little bit more complicated to demonstrate the power of the query. Each report will require its own query that you will build in this lesson and then run each time your data changes. Let's get started with report number 1. As before, click Create and then Query Design. But this time, when the Show dialog box appears, instead of choosing Tables, click the Queries tab on top and choose the query you just built called Data Combine. As mentioned earlier, this query acts as one large virtual table that contains all the data from the 3 tables we downloaded. Only 5 steps to go. Number 1, drag down the asterisk because we'll show all the fields in these 2 reports. Number 2, drag down the product number for the sort and the total sale field for the criteria. Number 3, choose your sort by typing an A for ascending in the product field. Number 4, enter greater than $2,500 in the criteria field for total sale because we only want to show products greater than $2,500. Number 5, click off the Show Table box for the product number and total sale field because they're already included with the rest of the fields in the first column of the grid and they don't need to appear again. Toggle to View with a click and you'll see your results. Product sales greater than $2,500 and product number order. You can move the product number field to the left by clicking on the field name to highlight it. The down arrow will appear, and then re-click the field name and drag it all the way to the left. You can also highlight a column and choose Hide if you don't want to see it. That's easier than cherry-picking the fields you want to see in the query design. And you can also unhide if you change your mind. You could also do this later when you bring your results back to Excel, but I think it's easier and better to do it one time here than remembering to do it each time in Excel. You can now click Save and name your first report Query 1, Product Sales Greater than $2,500. You never have to type the name again, so make it as descriptive as you'd like. You can put spaces in query names if you want to, but I like capitals or underscores to differentiate numbers, words, and dates. Close the query and you're all set. When you import new data, just click this query for your results. Let's move on to report number 2. To create it, we'll use a shortcut. We'll create the second report by making a copy of our first report and modifying it. Right mouse click the query we just created in the Object section and choose Copy, and then right click anywhere in the Object section and choose Paste. When the Paste As box appears, change the name to 2, select Sales in Chicago, KC, and click OK. Here I abbreviated the name a little, but you can name it whatever you like. To finish the query, right-click the new query name and choose Design Mode to modify the query in just 4 steps. First, we'll change the name of the product field number by clicking down and choosing Salesperson. Number 2, drag down the office field all the way to the right. Number 3, enter the first office criteria on the grid by entering Chicago below the office name, and then change the total sales criteria to $2,000 instead of $2,500. Number 4, since you have a different dollar limit for Kansas City, you have to go to the next line of criteria, and this time enter Kansas City and greater than $3,000. Note that had the dollar limits been the same, you could have just entered the phrase Chicago or Kansas City in the first criteria row like this. However, because the office names and amount fields are different, multiple lines of criteria is needed here. Also note that Access automatically puts quotes around text to differentiate it from numbers or field references. If you're working with date criteria, it would put pound signs or hashtags around the criteria, and we'll demo that later. Toggle to View. As you can see, only sales for Chicago over $2,000 and sales for Kansas City over $3,000 are shown in View Results mode. If you want to move columns, now's the time to do it. You can also hide, unhide, and freeze columns like you would in Excel. Just right-click and make your choice. When you are finished, click Save and you can close the query. Your first two report queries are built, and we are rolling with new knowledge that we will apply in the future lesson. As promised, this course builds on itself, and as long as you take the time you need to understand how Access, and in particular the query object functions, you will do just fine. In the next lesson, we will learn to build queries using the total feature. Lesson 8. In this lesson, you will learn to use the total line in Access. If you've used the subtotal feature in Excel for totals, you see that this feature is a lot easier for getting group totals. Let's get started with report assignment number 3. We will create a new query and once again use the data combine query. This time we will use the double-click method of adding fields to the grid, so we will double-click the date and sales fields. Toggle to view and you will see all the records. Let's get this to total by date. Simply click the total icon. You see each column defaults to group by. Since we want our sales to be totaled, we will change the sales field to sum. As you can see, there are other options similar to the subtotal function in Excel, such as average, min, max, etc. Let's set sort by date as before. Now go back to view. You now have total sales by date. If you don't like the field names assigned, such as sum of total, you can go back to design view and right-click the field. Choose properties and assign your own field name under caption. We'll call our caption total sales. That's it. Don't want the pennies? Change the decimal place to 0. You could also make a couple of other formatting changes right here, but we're good for now. You can X out the property dialog box to reclaim space, but let's leave it open since we're using it again. Click View and you'll see the results. If you click Save in this mode, you can name it 3 Total Sales by Date. For the next two reports, we'll piggyback on the one we just did, same as in the last lesson. Close the query and right mouse click the query name in the object section and click Copy and then right click Paste anywhere in the query section. When the dialog box appears, change the name to Query 4 Total Sales Product and click OK. Now we will open up Query 4 in Design View, and after a few changes we'll be all set. First, let's add number of transactions to the results. For learning purposes, we'll do it by using the third way of putting fields on the grid, which is to populate the field and the table name manually. Since we're doing a count as opposed to a sum or an average, we can use count on any field in the table. So let's choose transaction number for the field. Since it only appears in the table name automatically appears below, and it defaults to group in the total field. Let's click and change it to count, so you'll get the number of records. Finally, go to captions for this field and change it to number of sales, and we're done. Note that you could have used any of the other two methods of bringing in the field, drag and drop or double click, and they would have worked as well. Lastly, we change the date field to product. Click View to check it out. And then click Close, and Access will ask you if you want to save the changes, and of course you say yes. And the query for Report 4 is done. For our final query, right-click Query 4 to copy, click Paste again, and enter the name of the last query in this lesson, 5 Total Sales by Salesperson, and click OK. In Report 5, we also want to add the average field. First though, we change product to salesperson by changing the product name field to name. I think in this case, the easiest way to enter the average field is to double-click the sales field and change the grouping to average. Then change the caption to average sale, and that's it. Click View to make sure the report looks good. And it does. And then close and save. And now you're all set with reports 3, 4, and 5. We've completed half the reports. Remember that anytime you want to run them, you just click them and they will work with whatever data you've imported to your tables. Also, remember that if you make a mistake when working on your own, it's okay. You're not actually touching your data in Excel. Just go back to Design View, fix things until you see the results you want. Before we move to the next lesson, let's create a grand total query to do a math check against our data. We'll create a new query using the Data Combine query. We'll click the total icon and drag down 2 fields, transaction number and sales. And then select count for the transaction number and sum for the sales column. Let's view it. This will give us the totals from the transaction sheet that we can check anytime we have a concern over whether our data is properly loaded. Let's close it and save it as Math Check. So this is the end of Lesson 8. We built 3 queries using the Query Total feature. It just demonstrates how what you've learned in the earlier lessons built on itself, and you're well on your way to mastering integrating Access with Excel.